So we will call to order the June 3rd meeting of the Jericho Planning Commission. Thank you everybody for being here and joining us online on Zoom. Chris, thank you always. Go over the agenda quickly. We'll have time for public comment, approve our minutes. And then our primary topic tonight is really a planning discussion, which is ironic because we're the planning commission, but we are planning the next batch of work for the planning commission. And the next batch of work, Chris and I have organized under the topic of enabling housing. Because as you know, we finished a round of amendments that we recommended to the select board for focusing on the village centers. That was governed by a grant, and so our scope was somewhat defined by the grant. And as we worked through that project, we kept a list of things that we couldn't get to. And we also have heard input from the Affordable Housing Committee and the select board. So we sort of tabled those items until later, and now later is now. And so we are getting our arms around the scope of that next phase of work, and that's what that discussion will be. Number 5, enable housing. Then we'll hear reports, other business, and wrap up. And I think you might be pleased to notice that Chris has scheduled us to adjourn this evening at 8:30.
But it might be soon.
You might even be sooner than that, yeah.
I will.
And it's a lovely evening. It's a lot of sacrifice to come to town hall on a lovely summer evening. So thank you. Okay. Anyone need to change the agenda? Okay. Public comment. So for people on Zoom, just so you know, there are no members of the public here with us in town hall. If you have a comment that you'd like to make right now, we ask that you use the time to make a comment for an item that's not on the agenda, because we will have time for public comment later on for the items that are on, for the main item that's on the agenda. Does anybody online wish to offer a comment to the Planning Commission? Limited to 3 minutes or less. And if you have a comment, you could just unmute yourself. Okay, is that everybody? Can we see everybody in the panel on the Zoom?
I believe.
Okay. I will then move on to number 4 to approve the minutes. Someone want to make a motion?
I move to approve the minutes from May 20th.
In a second.
Second.
Eric, thank you. Any corrections or clarifications to the minutes? Eden? Okay, all those in favor of approving the minutes of May 20th, please say yes.
Yes.
And that's everybody here. Okay, so the next topic is number 5, enable housing. And I just gave a brief introduction, so I'm going to pass it off to Chris.
Great, thanks. So like Susan said, tonight we're kicking off our work on enabling housing, and that we just finished our recommendations to make it easier to build housing in the village center. So now we're beginning our work to identify ways to build appropriate housing in other areas of town. What we want to make clear, though, is that zoning is just one factor in creating housing. There are lots of factors that are beyond the control, really, of the Planning Commission and of the town. So, but what the Planning Commission is doing is we're going to do what we can to propose zoning amendments that remove barriers that we identify and hopefully include some incentives in zoning that will help create more housing and affordable housing. Other entities in town can play their role in encouraging and supporting housing in Jericho and in the ways that they do that. So tonight we're going to lay the groundwork for what we will be doing. We're going to start with how this work is grounded in the town plan. We'll go through the Affordable Housing Committee's recommendations. We'll review how our work is going to be structured in terms of we're going through a process. And then hopefully tonight we'll just get confirmation everything is moving in the right direction, and get some feedback on anything that we might have missed that we want to make sure that we include that we haven't thought of. So like all of our work, enabling housing is grounded in the town plan policies. These are just a few of the more relevant ones that I put. the town plan that are shown on the screen here. Specifically proposing incentives in zoning for housing and reducing obstacles to build affordable housing. So it's specific in the getting it done section of the town plan. Much of the town plan reinforces focusing housing in the village centers. It does call out that development in other areas should be strategically different to make sure that it protects natural resources and rural character. It's that latter half that we're going to be focusing on as part of this work. A parallel initiative that we're going to be considering is the natural resources overlay, and specifically work on mapping forest blocks completed by the Conservation Commission. And we'll see how those overlap as we go through our work on this. The town plan gives guidance on this too by reinforcing that more intense growth should be in the village areas and ensuring the development in other areas minimizes their impact. So that's where that forest block information is going to be helpful. The Affordable Housing Committee made 8 recommendations that were forwarded to the Planning Commission from the Select Board. Some have been partially addressed or entirely addressed as part of the BMG update that we just did. So I'm just going to go through those quickly. The first one was permitting 4plexes in all residential zones. The bylaw modernization grant has proposed making this change in all districts except for the rural, ag, residential, and forest. We'll be looking specifically at density and the number of units per minimum lot area for this one. Another one was removing regulatory distinctions between multifamily and single-family homes. I don't believe this was addressed by the BMG work, so we'll be looking at the table of uses and some dimensional requirements for that. The third was reducing and eliminating lot sizes. The BMG does propose doing this in the village centers, which was the emphasis of that recommendation. But we'll look at that too to see if there are other areas for possibly looking at that in some other locations. And then reducing frontage requirements. The BMG work does propose doing this in the village centers, which again was the emphasis of this recommendation, but we'll look to see if there are other areas of possibility.
A quick question. Does that, on number 1, does that mean that we're not considering 4plexes in rural ag and forestry and?
No.
Okay,
Yes, this is only an update of what the current status is.
okay,
So I'm sorry if I didn't mean to come up that we would not be looking at that.
okay.
Another quick question, sorry.
Yeah.
What is BMG in this context?
Thank you. So it stands for Bylaw Modernization Grant. It's a program that the state has. It's the fund where the funding came from. It's not a great name for the project. It's, I think, what did we ended up calling? We ended up calling it like
Zoning for better neighborhood.
Well, we've just referred to it as BMG. It's sort of in-house language. It's just an acronym that would be stands for Bylaw Modernization Grant, which is all the work that we did to look at zoning specifically in the village centers.
Okay, great.
Yeah, I'm going to refer to it a couple more times, so it's good that you asked. So thank you.
So think of the BMG work as phase 1. And phase 1, the Planning Commission has finished its work on phase 1. And we forwarded recommendations to the Select Board. And they're holding a public hearing about that phase 1 work in June. And that phase 1 BMG, bylaw modernization grant, funded changes focused on the village centers. And now this is phase 2, kind of I'm overly simplifying it, but phase 2, which is, okay, now what about other areas and what about things that were uncovered during that work, but were not addressed during that work because they were out of scope. So now we're scoping phase 2.
Great. That's helpful.
Yeah, and another thing, I guess, just to note, the bylaw modernization grant project was funded through a grant. So we were actually able to bring in a consultant to help us do that work. What's different about phase 2 is we're doing this, we don't have any outside support. So this is all like staff work, planning commission work that we'll be doing to see what we can do to move forward for the other areas outside of the village centers.
Town planner extraordinaire, Christian.
And the planning commission is true. All right, so there were just 4 more recommendations from the Affordable Housing Committee. One was looking at putting multiple houses on one lot. So our current regulations have allow only one principal building on a lot. That does not include ADUs. It's just the primary residence. The BMG work did change that for village centers, but we'll look at that to see how that might apply to other areas as well. Number 6 was looking at incentives for clustering development. We're definitely going to be looking at that, particularly as we're looking at the rural areas and how we might want to get more housing, but also achieve our goal of protecting the open character, the open space, the forest area, agricultural land. Another is updating density calculations to incentivize smaller but more compact housing development. That dovetails with number 6, so we'll be looking at that too.
I think we wrote that poorly. The and is doing a lot of work there. It's both updating the density calculation and coming up with incentives for smaller, denser housing.
Great. There's some questions from us, getting some clarity on this will be great tonight to get some clarity on exactly what some of these means to make sure we're in the right direction on that. The last one on this list is removing the eligibility requirement for adaptive reuse of existing structures. We can check this off of our list because that was done entirely through BMG. So there's no longer a date associated with needing to be eligible for
And
adaptive
It's
reuse.
years now, right?
I don't think there's no year. It's just any existing structure.
Right, confirm.
I'll confirm that, but that's
Okay, huh,
my
yeah,
recollection.
that was gonna be like 30 years or.
I mean, I don't think there needs to be a number of years, but we can see what y'all did. I wasn't here when that happened. Although I was here for the passing, I should have seen it, but I didn't. There was an additional recommendation that isn't on this list, and I'm assuming that's because it's select board specific, which was to update the fee structure to incentivize rather than burden diverse housing types and building small. Permitting fees, road impact fees, etc. I think that's
That's correct.
under the purview of
Yeah.
the select board.
Yeah, I was just going to verbally acknowledge that. So there were 9 recommendations that went to the select board. 8 of them, the select board passed on to the planning commission to work on, and 1 they kept for themselves, which is the one that SJ just read through.
I have a question.
Yep.
Is there, and I didn't have a chance to look this up before the zoning, is there anything in the zoning now that would prohibit somebody from renting rooms in their house?
Renting them out.
Yeah, like, I remember somebody at one point in the last few years saying, oh, you
Can't have a rooming house.
you can't have a rooming house, but, I'm just thinking, I feel like there are a lot of underutilized bedrooms in Jericho. And, I just don't know if that's something we want to consider.
I'm not aware of any limitation for being able to rent one room or every room
Okay.
in your house.
I think I don't know of anything, but I will double check on that. I think what would have tripped that up before was our definition of household,
Okay.
which we have now changed to be more broad, and it's not, a household is not specifically people that are related to each other.
And another question, is there, and this is probably outside of our purview, but is there a way to allow somebody to reclassify how many bedrooms is in their house?
Without a remodel or with a remodel?
Without a remodel, so that, let's say you have 4 bedrooms, you're only using 3, and you want to build an ADU, but you can't afford to do the septic. And, a lot of times what we tell people is if there's no closet in the room, it doesn't technically count as a bedroom, but the question is, you'd have to get it. I just don't know if there's how you would get permitting authority to recognize that you're not actually adding a bedroom.
Right.
Well,
You wanted to
if
make
you,
it
so can you explain to me the process of that? I'll use my house. I've got the equivalent of 4 bedrooms. One of them is an office that has a closet in it. In order for me to turn that into a ADU,
Well, I'm saying, let's say you wanted to build an ADU in your backyard,
in the backyard.
but you would, in order to
And so
do
if I
that,
do that and I take my office with the closet,
you're still a 4-bedroom.
get rid of the closet. So now it's no longer a bedroom. I can build, you're wondering, can I build an ADU outside and use the septic?
Because, yes, because you're still, the septic goes by a number of bedrooms, and so I feel like the septic is a rate limiting issue for ADUs in town. And, but I also feel like there are a lot of houses that aren't using all of their bedrooms. Anyway, so I don't know what the process would be.
Well, and I also wonder like where, I should know this because we're about to dig up my leach field a couple months. And we're expanding, so I should know, but I'm trying to figure out where that original number came from. Like, is it from the appraisal or a record, or is it
Well,
just it's something you fill out on a form?
When you apply for your construction permit, it's the septic design, you have to submit a septic design, and it's directly related to the number of bedrooms.
So it's at the septic design stage, and so if you're, yeah, I don't know how
So
you
often
meant that.
So it's the, and maybe you know this, but it's the septic, like for the town's property, hopefully river. It's the septic capacity of the site that is dictating how many.
Yes,
Yeah, yeah,
100%.
Yeah, okay, yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I'm just trying
But-
to, I'm trying to nail down like where in the chain the number
Right.
is that you want to have modified. So it's on the original or
On
the
the
most
original
recent
Permit for the house,
for the septic.
for the house and the septic.
Permit.
But
Because if the septic were permitted 50 years ago and it said you could have 3 bedrooms, that's what you can have is 3 bedrooms, even if under today's technology, the septic would only have the capacity for 2 bedrooms, it's grandfathered in based on the septic at the time and the permit at the time. If you want to change how your house is listed in the grand list, because you want to pay more taxes, you could do that. You could say, I was 3 bedrooms and an office, and now I'm going to be 4 bedrooms. But it would require you to demonstrate that you have sufficient septic. But there's not a, there, okay, or.
Chris is talking
Right,
about
and
an
you-
increase, which is
So
Well,
you
it's
swap,
fees.
it's
Swap,
just,
it's not
if you
a
do a swap, my understanding is that it's not exactly 1-to-1. 1 bedroom is equivalent to an ADU, if that's not the case, because a dwelling has a slightly higher
Get your
septic
bathroom.
requirement than just a standalone bedroom does. However, they've also changed how they count it. So they've gotten less strict. I only am saying all this because we're having recently like looked at septic capacity. And that what it used to be very much 1-to-1, like if you had 1 bedroom, it was 5, and 2 bedrooms was 10, and 3, I'm just talking about gallons or whatever. But now it's more scaled, so that the 3rd, the 4th, the 5th bedrooms don't require the same as like the initial. But once you go to a dwelling, then that's different than just a bedroom. So
But
it depends
nonetheless,
on.
there still might be a possibility where someone could
Absolutely,
reclassify their house.
yes, and the town, I don't think the town, the zoning doesn't prevent that, and I don't think the town would have an interest in preventing that. The only interest would be to make sure that the septic is adequate, which is done by the state, not by the town.
I think it's a good thought to follow up on. And find out exactly what that process would be, and then just to look at our zoning and just make sure that there's nothing in it that would prevent that from happening. And if there is something in a town regulation that's preventing that from happening, what is it? And do we have
Why
a
is it
recommendation
there?
for that?
Yeah.
Or if there was a way to help give someone a roadmap for if you wanted to pursue this, this is how you do it. Because otherwise, that, the ADU thing is just, I don't think it's gonna happen.
Yeah, that's something that the Affordable Housing Committee has talked about. Another idea that we floated to was encouraging people, if they have the capacity, to get a quote for adding. Because so many of us are having to redo our septics right now, see how much more it would cost to add a bedroom on
Sure.
to your capacity while you're digging in there. And just kind of educate, I mean, it goes along with what you're saying about educating people on what their options.
Well, I'm just looking at a ADU standpoint, that was a good thing. And it does say that bedroom is defined on page 3 of Jericho's regulations, so I don't know what those
It's probably
regulations.
just the definition.
But that's different than
The septic demand.
the septic
It's a
demand.
state.
Oh, right, well, I was thinking if the definition is, yeah, anyway, I think it'd be worth looking into.
Yeah.
To see how.
Yeah.
One of the restrictions on that either way is if you're on community septic, then that's a more complex process all the way through. I don't know what percentage of Jericho's.
Generally not. I mean, unless, if your community is at the max of its capacity, then sure. But if it's municipal sewer, it's relatively straightforward.
Right, we don't have a lot of municipal.
No, I
sewer in
know.
Jericho. We have a lot of community sewer,
At this time.
which is very different.
That would be a question for the HOA to resolve in terms of capacity of what they've got.
Yeah,
right.
How are they out?
And whether they have any spare capacity left over. A lot of HOAs were designed at a certain time for a certain demand, and many of the houses in those have already converted space of a garage into a spare bathroom or spare bedroom with a bathroom, whatever. So it's a great idea. We should encourage it, but let's be realistic in what the impact will be.
Sure.
Relatively minor.
Anything else?
The only other thing I'll say about the recommendations, there were some more kind of general loosey-goosey things that we didn't think were quite as actionable for the select board as this list. One of them being, we talk about expanding, looking at our current zoning districts, and in particular, considering expanding our village district. Looking at those boundaries, and then something that you made a point of highlighting in the beginning was really strategizing our land use and protection, and thinking about being intentional about where housing, and in particular dense housing, can happen, rather than just historic zone. Which you said.
Yeah, and just to dovetail on that, I think the work that we did in looking at the
Yeah.
future land use map update is really gonna inform that and be a really nice complement to rolling it all together.
Yeah.
All right, so in terms of our process, so I'm just gonna outline sort of how, we're gonna move through all of this. So first, we're gonna start with gathering data and getting an understanding of the issues from multiple sources, so you can kind of see on the left where all those inputs are. And then we'll see if there are some other related issues previously identified that we can consider as part of this work. So that's the BMG out of scope, the parking lot zoning issues. One of the things I have on there is a developers conservation forum. So what I'd like to do is pull together, in a public setting, a group of developers who have built housing in Jericho or in surrounding communities. Also, people from the conservation community, have them share real life experiences about what is tricky about our zoning that could be simplified. What, if there is anything in zoning that could make a development more financially practical, or if there's nothing that zoning can do. I mean, we just need to have a real honest discussion from the people that are actually doing the work about what's achievable and what's not.
And that would be developers from outside of Jericho, as well as any who are in Jericho.
Right, so I need to do some thinking about who we want to participate in that, and I'll be reaching out to see if you have any suggestions. I know Sabina's not here tonight, but I talk to her, and so we added some conservationists to that discussion. I think that could be a really interesting discussion between all the players to see what comes out of that.
I've
It
got
can get
a,
really hot too.
Constructive.
Yeah, I got a spreadsheet. I don't have a Rolodex, but I've got a spreadsheet of people.
Great.
Of developers.
So that we'll use that information as we focus on our priority issues, which is enabling housing, and then looking at the natural resources overlay, specifically the forest blocks. Then we'll think through what our best options are. We'll look at best practices, what's worked here in Jericho, what hasn't, and then move on to some specific recommendations. So I am hoping that as we go through this process, we can be looking at red lines and proposed zoning changes throughout, but not all bunched up at the end. I'm not sure how that's going to work, because that's all very interrelated, but I'd like to try to chunk it out a little bit so we're not where we were with B&G, where we've got pages and pages and pages and having to go through it all at the end. So I'm not sure how that will work, but we'll figure that out. Susan and I discussed the best way to structure our discussion, and this is what we came up with, and we're calling them topics of reform, which we've borrowed from the Enabling Better Places guide, because if you remember, they had certain topics of reform. So we actually structured it sort of similar to that. So first, we're going to focus on uses. We're proposing to focus on uses. So what types of housing do we want to see and where? So this will kind of help us focus some of our discussion. Then we'll look at dimensional requirements that we might want to retain, reduce, or eliminate. Then we'll move on to site plan considerations, and this would include anything on design guidance like clustering development, protecting natural resources. And then we'll end up looking at the review process. So what might we be able to have enough regulations or guidance that the ZA can approve? What we need to go to the DRB? We'll sort through all that. Any questions on either the process or the approach? So this just cues up our discussion for tonight. So, well, before that, Susan, is there anything that we covered that you think I missed that you would
no,
like to?
got it all.
Great. So this is when I turn it over to you
Uh-huh.
for what the questions are. So does this make sense? Are there things that we haven't considered? I think we already got some good feedback on that. And any other concerns or feedback?
Think, I don't know that it's a topic of reform. No, I'm gonna argue it's a topic of reform. I think that there is little that we can do, but I think we've had some informal and formal conversations about incentive structure and about like bonuses and just trying to be creative in not only making the kinds of housing that we want more feasible, but really kind of making it more attractive and pushing people towards that.
By new attractive.
Faster, easier,
Incentivized.
cheaper.
Yeah, or like you'll get something for doing it.
I see,
Like,
so attractive.
there's
to fit,
and
not-
I think that it's
how
an
it
important
works.
question for the forum that you're proposing. Like, what are some of the things that a town can provide or that we can put in our regulations that, yeah, this is gonna cost more to do whatever, but it's worth it because that the road is gonna be owned by the town.
Using the road is a good example, because most developers have to put in a road at their own expense. And then the people living in the road have to pay for all the maintenance at their own expense. So that's sort of what we're talking about earlier with Black Walnut, where Black Walnut was approached us saying, we take over our town. If we say, okay, you can do that, but you have to allow, then it's a quid pro quo, and we should have more of those available. but I don't think the town has taken over a development road in 20 years.
No, I don't think the town's built a road that long.
So maybe I chose poorly by saying road, because I
No,
don't think
I
it's on
But a
a
road
tangent,
is,
but
a huge development.
it is a huge,
And
and
it's a huge cost. And we have specifications for roads and how wide they are, what big the turnarounds have to be. The idea of putting in sidewalks in that's coming in there, the idea of installing infrastructure on it. That's a major investment. If the town can you do that and get growth, that's a big barrier we get rid of.
So we're gonna, as we go along, we're gonna have to differentiate between what's a zoning change and what's a policy recommendation. And,
Right.
And I do think like looking at the density bonuses, or looking at some of the bonus language that we already have.
right, so I think Chris and I kind of lumped that under the top of it's funny because maybe if we go back and look at the previous slides, if you go to the first slide that has the approach, not that one, the previous one. This slide is really in my mind like the strategy, like here's all the things we're gonna look at. But once again, we're not gonna be able to fix everything, we're not gonna be able to do everything, so we're gonna have to focus by the time we get to the blue box section. But I think casting a wide net and really listening, and because the town has previously used density bonuses as the carrot to increase housing production. But
no one
that-
ever used it, right?
it's hardly ever used because you can't overcome the cost of Act 250 in the rural area. And so maybe like really that bonus is not effective. And so we would be listening to other ideas. If the other ideas are like build the roads, or if the other ideas are things, that's when we're gonna have to say like, oh, well, we should make this recommendation to the select board, this can need more research, this should go back to the Affordable Housing Committee, whatever. So I think of this describing a very like strategic process, and then the next slide is kind of like the nuts and bolts. So where we had when we went through all of the recommendations from the Affordable Housing Committee, and Chris went through and identified, okay, if we want to look at this request, here's all the sections of the regulation that we have to analyze and decide. So those things bubbled up into these categories. So the PUD clustering density bonuses, in my mind, we would address them probably looking at dimensional requirements and site plan, because that's where they both are. But so this slide kind of looks like that's missing, but it's not missing because this slide was just like a first pass at like, here's all the work that we're probably gonna have to do. But this work, this tactical, will have to change a little bit. What's in the boxes is gonna probably change based on what we do earlier on.
And this isn't intended to be prescriptive where it's like, we're only going to look at what recommendation.
Yeah.
But those are where the general emphasis of those recommendations are. So there will be a lot of back and forth.
And the other thing that this makes me think about too is what's in the parking lot, and obviously we're not at that stage now, but kind of going back and seeing like what's in the parking lot, where do those things shake out here?
Right, so if you go back one slide, so the parking lot, which we refer to, is our zoning issues that have been collected over time that seem like they could contribute to enabling more housing. So I'm thinking that that inputs, each of those items of inputs, and maybe there are other inputs as well, would be like whole meetings or whole topics in and of themselves, where we will look at the parking lot and the planning commission will look at it and say, here are the ones that we think feed into this, that we want to address, that we have the tools we think this is something we should take on now. Same thing with the out of scope items from the BMG, which was like fourplexes in the rural forestry. So that I think there's a lot of work to be done by all of us in this inputs column.
So for the inputs and looking at the BMG out of scope and the parking lot zoning issues, do we want to use the 8 recommendations from the Affordable Housing Committee as sort of some guardrails for us? And looking at those 2 buckets of things and making sure that we're pulling things that are really related to those to kind of help narrow what we're working on? Or do we want to take a more broader look and say, okay, we just want to pull in everything that has to do with housing? And then if we do that, that could be
Unwieldy.
unwieldy.
I don't know that we need to do like a control F housing, but we've got, I mean, we already have the parking lot as a list. But I think
Is
we
it
can
an
go
actual
through,
list?
Yeah.
There's somewhere it exists.
we can check yes, no, like that doesn't feel unwieldy to me. Then again, I haven't seen your parking lot. And I haven't looked at my parking lot.
And of course, I describe it as very black and white, very, very control. I mean, I guess I want to make sure that we are aware of how things can. And trying just to make sure that we stay as focused as we can.
I also think it's important to acknowledge that we were given a mandate from the select board that is the list of 8. And, you know, so there is that obligation to fulfill, and then do we need to separate those things out, or how enmeshed, I don't know.
I think we might want to look beyond just what's been in the parking lot and in the BMG out of scope. And it might be useful just for a little bit to get some community outreach of what is it that people see. And that, as we talked about bringing the developers in, finding out from the developers themselves who would be doing most of this work. What is it that they want to see from the town of Jericho that will make Jericho more attractive? Because we aren't getting a lot of development in here anymore. There's no Jericho East being built anywhere in town. There's a closest you've got is like Hendy Lane with 8 houses on that. And if we're going to solve housing, we kind of need something like a Jericho East.
Well, I feel like,
Much as we may not like it, or Foothills, or any of those other ones.
I feel like
Love that.
one of the larger,
I didn't say there's anything wrong with Foothills.
one of the larger obstacles to developing affordable housing in town is the lack of infrastructure.
Right.
By which I would include roads as well as water and septic. And I don't know if there's some way to sort of step back and think about how the town could help solve some of those issues. I mean, we will get septic in Riverside, but if there's a way to, and I don't know what the answer is, but if there's a way for the town to help facilitate infrastructure development in other areas, whether it's through public-private partnerships or leveraging the town's ability to bond at a lower rate than a contractor's ability
With the new,
to borrow. And this has already gone beyond my expertise, but if there's a more creative way to say, here's how we can, here's 5 strategies going forward, how can, that might be worth pursuing, sort of out of the box thinking that could, if you had if there was a new road, 10 lots on it, and infrastructure, was in place, you'd get builders there tomorrow. So if there was a way for the town to step back and think, what are the, thinking more abstractly, what are some possible ways that we could facilitate infrastructure? Because we can't control cost of building materials, we can't control labor costs. So what we can control is infrastructure.
And to take that further, we could get wastewater into the current commercial district Realistically, how long would it take for someone to start developing that? It's prime real estate land for it, it's ideally located. Nobody's building on it because there's no infrastructure. That, if the town can do anything, it's gonna have a really big impact. It's bonding and it's putting in money for infrastructure, water and sewer.
Right.
All the rest of this, it'll put houses up in onesie twosies in various places. But if you really want to move the needle,
Well, that's kind of what
we've got to make a step change, right?
Well, and I mean, I think that's what you're getting at with Jericho East, like what, yes, we wanna make sure that the onesie twosies and the infills can happen, but we are also talking about pockets of cluster development, and those are, you know, a community sector. When you're building, you know, a development at that level, you can spread the infrastructure across all of those and have a shared system. We've got plenty of examples of those in town.
Well, and those are easily, the road, you know, the cost of doing a road and the cost of a community septic, those are easily quantifiable. And you put a number on it, and you say, okay, here's 5 different ways we can have the money, have the funds to do that.
The piece about community septic is that by and large, the members of that community pay for the maintenance and the upkeep of it. And you have cases like the one on Mile White Road where their community well was not properly funded. So when it went south, they didn't have a reserve fund for it. If we choose to say this is going to be run by the community, to come out of community homeowners dues and all that to support it, without giving town oversight or mandate to make sure that they have money for the repair when it happens. To me, it's just easier, just build it into their town assessment, have the town do it. Rather than say, hey, community, you've got to be responsible for this.
Yeah, that feels to me like a logistical thing to solve after you've figured out different funding opportunities.
But at the end
there's-
of the day, we're talking about planning and regulations, and so like, again, thinking about making sure that we aren't in the way of allowing the kind of cluster development that can provide the number of homes and the density that we need a system like that, and making sure that that's a possibility. But I do think that letting developers know that they're coming into a town that is welcoming that and supportive of making that feasible is important.
Yeah, or a density bonus if you have community septic. I mean, there are ways of thinking.
But I think we could, on the one hand, they're not mutually exclusive. On the one hand, we can ensure that our regulations aren't limiting. On the other hand, maybe there's a way for the town to actually help.
Yeah, and I don't want to dismiss the onesie twosies. We need those too.
Sure.
But that's, if we want to hit our goals, that's going to be a long, slow slog to get there.
Actually, can you read the 9th recommendation again?
A ninth, right?
The 9th.
It's actually the eighth, if you want to be technical about it, which clearly I do. Update fee structure to incentivize rather than burden diverse housing types and building small. For example, eliminate permit and road impact fees for dwellings less than 1,200 square feet.
How much of what we're talking about now falls under that?
Some.
No, but that's impact fees. That's not building the
It's
infrastructure.
very specific on impact fees. Okay. I'm just trying to parse out like what we can take on as a planning commission and then what we need to bundle and package as recommendations. But we'll sort that out.
And now is a lovely time to say that you have an affordable housing committee. That maybe some of that work gets offloaded to. Some of the advocacy education piece that isn't part of this, or I don't know. We will be meeting next week though, and I don't know that this is the right forum, but I think there should be some discussion about how we partner with the committee and what kinds of, because we're ad hoc. If we have some clear directives and clear scope, you know, we're happy to meet more regularly, I'm sure.
Or I wonder if we could loop the JCDC into some creative thinking about public-private partnerships and project financing. I
I
don't know
think
what
the
your,
JCDC should certainly be at the forum. Yeah,
Yeah, they would be a group that would go to for the bonding of
well, I would think,
some of these.
yeah,
I'm a middle child. And then we have Chris here who wants us, or I'm putting words in your mouth, but is trying to help us focus and organize the work and do an amount of work that we can actually complete by December of 2025. That is a package, we came into this discussion thinking that it was gonna be like a package of zoning amendments that address these things. So that's my older sibling. And then my younger siblings are like, but we would like to be more expansive and we want to think outside the box and we want to maybe look at other levers that the town could pull. So, and I'm also thinking that one of the other things I'd like us to work on in the same time frame is the capital budget. And there's just some percolating around that, so that'll start around the same time. And I was sort of thinking, is that maybe a good outlet for some of that more ambitious, expansive energy? Or do we say, you know what, we just did a whole big round of zoning. Let's let it ride, see what happens. We don't want to do zoning for the next 6 months. We'd rather do some of these other things, and except that we've been asked by the select board to address certain zoning topics.
I guess the things I've been talking about seem outside of our expertise. Outside of mine personally, for sure. And so my feeling is I want to encourage that kind of thinking. I'm not sure how much time or bandwidth it would take from the planning commission because I think it's that expertise would come from somewhere else.
Mhm.
I don't know exactly where, except maybe to start with the JCDC, but
Well, depending on once we define what the specific questions are that we want to pursue, we've got Chittenden County Regional Planning Commission as a resource to go to. And if they don't know the answer, they will know who to put us in touch with. There are state agencies we can go to. I think there are a lot of resources out there for us to tap into that can help inform the discussions.
Who wants to try the GBIC?
Mm.
Greater Burlington Investment Council, which is Chittenden County, and I think do they go up to St. Albans as well?
I think maybe, yeah.
They have a lot of expertise in not just building industrial parks, but
well, we could reach out to the large businesses in Chittenden County and say, need housing,
Oh, well, we know the answer, yeah,
right? So
But that's a really,
UVM is doing that in South Burlington, for
Right.
sure.
yeah,
right.
because the conferences that I have been at where municipalities are doing interesting housing projects, there is an outside partner, which we don't have an obvious one here in Jericho. So
keep an island firing, right?
No, but we're close to the short.
I think they're spending money these days.
Well, we did-
Chittenden County.
But we did
Yes.
hear this during the work on the town plan. We heard from the schools who said that they have teachers, they have staff, they have families. So that's sort of an employer.
But the schools won't have the money to
No.
kick in towards something. Whereas
Oh, I would think,
UVM might,
right,
would,
yeah.
For the mountain.
I would think about,
Beta or.
I think the other direction, I think SMUG
Yeah.
and,
Yeah, well, sure.
Johnson State University. I mean, it's cheaper to live out there, but it's maybe harder to attract employees out there. So you're not necessarily suggesting these initiatives as ones that the planning commission would take on and say, we're gonna get this done?
I would like to think that we could inspire someone to take these on. I just don't know that we're the. I don't feel qualified to do that. I don't know. I think that's outside of our range, so I think it would be like, here's 5 ideas. And maybe we check in with whoever it is.
So maybe as we go through this process that's displayed here, that's one of the things that might be an outcome that's not necessarily deliverable from us, but is an outcome that we're expecting, that we're gonna come up with a whole bunch of good ideas that we're gonna want to pass along to somebody else, whether it's the Affordable Housing Committee, the Select Board, JCDC, whomever.
Yeah, I'm not sure it's outside the realm of the planning commission. When you look at the enabling legislation for the state in terms of what falls under the authority of a planning commission.
I meant
It's-
this, I guess I meant more of the expertise. Like, I don't know.
Yes,
I don't know how
yes.
to do any of that funding.
But there might be some things that come up that actually do fall under something we could do,
Mhm,
but they're clearly beyond the scope of this.
mhm,
But we're gonna be developing a work plan for 2026, 2027, so
mhm.
we should be thinking about that too.
I do believe that we have a role in this that's beyond just the regulatory role. It's also the prioritization, setting the directions,
Mhm.
potentially even putting together the pieces that make this happen without regulation. And we can't regulate our way into getting someone to invest a couple of $1 million in anything. But we can have communications with people who do that and find out what do they need to enable that, and then work on regulations that will make it easier for them to come in. That part we can do.
So it sounds like of the inputs, the idea of having a forum and talking with developers, whether it's a series of meetings or a big pizza meeting or whatever, it sounds like it would be very useful and instructive and maybe something we'd want to do sooner in the process rather than later in the process.
It'll help us focus on what we need to do for legislation or regulation.
And that is, we're gonna get to a next step slide, but that's like one of the next steps for me is starting to pull that together, because I think that's gonna be really informative for us.
Yeah. I also think it wouldn't be super hard to quantify some of these things. I'm thinking of, again, Dominic from St. Albans, but he said, they weren't able to do anything until the community felt like they had hit rock bottom. And then for them, it was like empty storefronts. And so they were able to say, okay, if we invest whatever, $50,000, this is gonna be the return. So I'm thinking that we could do, our rock bottom is housing. But otherwise, we're not, which is directly related to students.
They're directly related.
But it would be possible to say, okay, if it costs whatever it cost, $300,000 to build a road, and you get, X number of housing units on that road, that math is sort of. We could,
Right, and that translates out into property tax
Yeah,
revenue
right.
and.
right,
I do think a lot of what we're talking about is well beyond the scope of what we're gonna be looking at, but I think if they come up, I think there should be I'm trying to think of if there's a way we can have like a complimentary report that goes along with the recommendations, the zoning recommendations that can be adopted by the select board and guide.
well, it's kind of macro and micro at the same time.
Yeah.
And we need to make sure that the zoning that we're adopting is going to,
Complement that.
yes, yeah.
In a way, zoning might be the catalyst that lets the rest of these things happen. But in order for us to make zoning work, we need to understand what's missing, what is the catalyst that's not there now. And that's, as you said, let's talk to developers, let's talk to housing guys, let's talk to everybody who is in the housing business about what does it take for a town like this to get 100 new units in.
Okay, anything else that you see is missing other things that we should be considering? Other than what we just talked about, which was a lot, so I think that was good.
Is the range an issue at all for any of this?
I'm really wary to do anything with the federal government.
Well,
I'm not saying we shouldn't.
it is a rule
talk
out
about
right
it.
now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But that's just my sense.
I would like to believe that the people who are running the range are a little more local focus. And they might say, these are the things that we need. We can't guarantee any funding for it, but if this was here, boy, we sure would like that. And in that sense, there may be a benefit in talking with
Okay, so our agenda includes some time for public comment. So does anyone on the Zoom want to offer comment on the discussion that the planning commission just had? Okay, I'm hearing none, although not your last opportunity, because this is the very first time we're talking about this, and we're gonna talk about it for the next 5 months. Okay, so Chris, you have some next steps.
Yeah, so this has been super helpful. We are gonna need a much more detailed work plan for each of the topics or kind of map that out. Like I said, I want to get started on the roundtable discussion planning, figuring how to do that as quickly as possible. Then sort of mapping out like what are we going to be doing at each planning commission meeting? What's the topic? How do they all relate to each other so that they're all working together to the big reveal at the end? And then another thing is what's our work group format structure? Like how, I mean, I've got other things that I have to work on. I can't dedicate my whole time on this.
What?
But there are other groups, like if we want to pull in JCDC or the Affordable Housing Committee, so how are we integrating them into our discussions? I think that we just need to think through that, and I mean, we will think through that and I'll come up with a recommendation. I think we should just be aware of that. So at least that's what I have on at least my list of things to do for next steps.
Do we have a priority for this list?
From the Affordable Housing Committee?
Yeah, is there a priority to those, or are we just,
You mean of the 8?
well, I mean, is there, like, how are you gonna sequence what we do?
Well, that I think gets back to this slide here
Yeah.
in terms of, oh, do you mean?
We did think that this was an appropriate sequence. That it would, that uses and would be at the beginning and review process would be at the end.
Okay,
So
And the
that's-
recommendations, some of them are roughly aligned with
okay.
for that discussion. Right,
Oh, I was out of order.
no, this is fine.
Okay. All right, any last comments on that? It's definitely vague. It's like a lump of clay at the moment, and it'll be a beautiful vase by the end.
Yeah, I can't,
We have an
I'm
end.
excited to
Right.
go back in. And I just, there's so many meetings before your time of, going through for the BMG and finding something and being like, oh, we really want to talk about this and having to push it aside. And I'm kind of excited to look back at those and identify what fits here and what doesn't.
It's not a neat, tidy package,
Oh, I know.
right? I mean, it's,
Right, but we're trying to get to a neat, tidy package. Potentially.
yeah, I don't think we're gonna get to a neat, tidy package,
Right.
but we want to have at least some method that we are using to churn through this so that we're not ricocheting back and forth.
Right.
So I think it's gonna be messy, but we're gonna do the best we can to keep it.
Yeah.
Tidy.
Okay, then our next topic is to hear from Chris Shaheen, town planner.
It'll be quick. So Cam Winter, one of our 2 interns, started today. So he is going to be helping us with some wastewater research. Right now, he's working on the work plan for what he and Finley are going to be doing. Finley Seltzer's our other intern, what they're going to be doing between now and middle of August. I'm really hoping that they can come and present to the planning commission just on what they're working on, both to give them the experience of presenting to the planning commission and just so that we can know what they're doing as they move it forward, and doing the same thing with them in the wastewater task force.
What are they working on?
They are, it's the outreach strategy for wastewater, so they're gonna be looking at what other towns have done to promote wastewater and what's been successful, and what hasn't been successful, what can we learn from that? Putting together a focus group of Jericho residents. What are their concerns about wastewater? What is appealing to them? And kind of if we would get it, what are their concerns about getting it? Helping putting together a messaging strategy, and a public outreach strategy. I think you had identified the Wakefield website with the video, so they can help us think through what it is that we want to do and maybe pull some of that together. At the very end, this is all being funded through the Leahy Institute for Rural Partnerships. Jericho is a pilot for them. So at the end, they'll be helping pull together a toolkit for other towns across the state that can learn from what we did and maybe use some of the things that we did that work well.
Do we have specific deliverables that, or do they have? Within those topics, do they have specific things they want to end up with, or?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's one of the reasons. So they're written down in one format. I'm having them go through and put that in a work plan so that those rules are up to date. And we can make sure that we're actually going to get to everything within the 8 to 9 weeks that they're here.
You have a process you'd like to follow.
So, I just want to make sure that we get things done. Yeah.
It works. I love
Most of the time.
Question for you on the wastewater outreach. Are they gonna be restricted to just Riverside area that will be affected by it, or will they be encouraged to go outside of that to see what the rest of the town thinks about it?
I think it will be the whole town because it's really a messaging campaign that's going to help us when we get to the town to vote on a bond, and that's town-wide.
The harder lift is outside of Riverside.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's where more people live.
Yeah.
Okay.
But they're not, well, this is a question. They're not doing all the outreach, right? They're developing a plan and a strategy so that after they're done, Jericho, some entity, some people, staff, committees, whatever, select board,
Oh, just.
has a roadmap to say,
I heard her
like,
say committee.
yeah, like here's the outreach, and then it's gonna be the ensuing 9 months
Yeah, like,
of outreach.
They may come up with like a messaging strategy, like these are what we should emphasize, and have a website with these components on it.
Don't
do
say
the-
that,
Don't,
don't,
yeah, don't say this, say that, yeah.
But probably I think what you guys were saying earlier about like no student and hitting rock bottom and Dominic and everything is like really, like we know the urgency of the problem and most people don't know the urgency of the problem. And a lot of times, and I think this is my approach also, is like sort of on the positive and what are the benefits and why do we want to do this? But it almost seems like there's a whole, like you need to drag everybody down into the mud. Like, do you realize how terrible this is? That there's some awareness, that the awareness of the problem has to happen, which is what I think was the most transformative contribution in a way from the Affordable Housing Committee, is to really like, it took a while for people to finally see like, oh wow, this is really an issue, but it's still a very small group of people that thinks that.
Well, Jericho's been on cruise control for 50 years.
Right.
And
Right, so that would be my comment to the interns would be like, make your, you know, what, does it make sense to spend some airtime? Some real estate on the website, some outreach to really like talk about the problem.
They'll be talking to you.
Yeah. Okay, good.
Susan already mentioned it before, but the bylaw modernization grant public hearing with the select board is happening June 26th. So I'm just making sure that all of that's in place for that to then move forward. And then you all should have a joint select board planning commission meeting on your calendars for Tuesday, June 24th. Sorry, SJ, I think you had you weren't green, you were yellow, but everyone out there that was the one that had the most likelihood of everyone
Might have a child.
We're gonna need extra seats at the table.
with a phone book on it. That would work fine. Great, so that's really all I have.
Extra seats at the table.
For-
They won't have them by then. No, the schedule that the select board published for what you're saying, because we might have two
Yeah.
additional select board members,
Oh, sorry.
is that
They might be short.
the letters of interest from people who might want to serve are due to the select board by June 24th. And then they are planning to interview people on June 26th, which must be before our meeting or after our meeting. Or did they realize that that's the same day?
I don't know. I know that June schedule has moved around a lot
Yeah.
because of
Oh, so maybe that's changed. That was that was what they published on Front Porch Forum.
Do we know? Do we have a little more for the joint meeting, more of a structure or a plan or?
I know we want to talk about capital budget planning. I think the select board's going to have more information on what their priorities are to share with the planning commission. Those were
We met Eric, Johnson, Paula, Chris, myself, to talk about what the agenda for that should be.
there were a couple
will
of
be,
things.
there
that
will be a
shifted.
more specific agenda, yeah.
Like we were going to talk about the flu and the housing targets, but that's all shifted.
Yeah,
Right.
I don't need to know what we're planning, I just wanna make
Yeah,
sure that we
there
have
will
a
be.
plan.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
And I still think it's a mistake to not initiate work on water to Jericho Center.
I don't know what to do about that.
Well, maybe the extended select board will. More receptive. I think that the initial part of that is not very expensive and it would allow the town to make informed decisions
Talk about hitting rock bottom,
going forward.
that situation is
It's a
rock
mess.
bottom.
It's not far from a crisis point and no one, I don't understand why no one is sort of coming up to speed on this.
Well, when you think about it, you think about what the very, first 1, 2, and 3 steps are. I assume, do you know what those are in your own mind? What those should be? You don't have to tell me what they are, just yes or no. Do you know what they are? You have a
Sense.
decent idea. And who in the town do you think is the right entity to do that work? The 1, 2, and 3, is that us or is that somebody else?
Well, I don't think it's a planning commission task. I think it's
Okay.
Public Works. I think it's Public Works and or Paula.
Would come from the select board.
So I just think it's. Right now, the approach is bury our heads in the sand. It's gonna be expensive. We can't afford to do it. And we're just gonna forget about the problem. And to me, like, that's not making an informed decision.
Mhm.
That's a fear-based reactive decision that isn't based in reality.
Mhm.
How much will it cost? Nobody knows. What are the issues? Nobody knows. Well, let's find out.
The other part that no one is talking about is who's gonna pay for it.
Sure. But
But
the
we
first
don't
question is,
know.
how much does it cost?
Yeah.
I mean, it's going to be the town garage. within the next 10 years, right? Those septic systems are all gonna fail.
Right.
That's a guarantee. I mean, it just is.
Do you think that it's something though that we could surface through the capital budget planning process? Potentially?
I don't know I don't know. I just think it's a mistake, a strategic mistake to not be starting the process. It's a long process, I'm sure.
Capital budgets, like a place to. I mean, I think it's one of those things where we gotta keep bringing it up over and over again, but in terms of,
I feel like it's first a work plan issue to make sure that it's on someone's work plan, because you have to do some amount of work to know what to put in the capital budget.
Right,
And I don't think it's currently on anyone's work plan.
right. So that's what I was
But
thinking
that's
about
part
it, but it's not on anybody's work plan because no one's defined the work. Like, this is where, you've brought much more discipline, like what's the scope? What are the deliverables? What's the work plan? What's the timeline? So. But you're saying, and none of that is really the planning commission's exact, it's not on our work plan. And they said at the last meeting that they were not inclined to have it on their work plan. But I kind of agree with you that so I'm looking for like the proper channel. So the starting point is looking at the wastewater study, because the wastewater study has like a whole, whatever, chapter on that circumstance, and does it outline TAP? Like, I don't have the command of the material.
I don't remember that it outlines tasks. I remember that it mentions it as a priority. But
But it
it's
didn't give
Champlain
any-
District Water District, right, that goes to the high school.
Mhm.
So their pipe stops at a certain point, and it's like, okay, well, we want the pipe to go from here to there.
Right, and what would be on the capital budget is the crossing of the river for the MMU path segment, so which you brought up before, and so that's like. I think that when it's presented to the select board as like, this is a problem and it should be it should be a priority and it really needs to be addressed. Doesn't give them like the actionable thing, and I think we've learned that they really appreciate having it a little bit more broken down into pieces, and they didn't assign staff to break it down into pieces, and I don't know that we're the ones to break it down into pieces either.
I don't think we have. Collectively, we might have the ability, but I don't think we have the authority to go out and say, we've talked to Champlain Water District, this is how much they will charge us to go here. We have talked to all the plumbers, this is how much they're gonna charge to connect everybody to the system. Town, here's how much it's gonna cost. I don't think we have that.
No, and
Or anything like that,
our
but that's
modus
what we need.
operandi would be like to apply for a grant to do the planning, to figure out what the problem is and what the solutions are. Since the Du Bois and King study didn't really didn't really.
Well, we can
produce
look at that again and just confirm whether it did or not, but,
They had a solution for it.
well, they had a wastewater solution, but
Yeah, they didn't have-
we're talking about bringing water to.
it seems to be.
And there had been previous studies done.
Bringing water to Jericho Center was part of the wastewater solution.
I think what I heard,
Right.
correct me if I'm wrong, but they said if we eliminate the need for septic at Jericho Center, we eliminate the need for community water. Because the problem isn't they don't have water, the problem is their wells are in the
The
septic.
water is, this flip side of that also holds true. If you have municipal water, septic issue can be solved locally. The issue is the overlap between the wells and the septic. And the water is also essential for firefighting.
Right.
So there's multiple reasons to have the water, and I think the water is possibly an easier fix.
Right, that was my impression, is that it's a lot less expensive.
I would think
A
that
lot more straightforward. We already have a water entity.
I would think one of the first steps would be a phone call to Champlain Water District. Anyway, I just think it's a strategic mistake to let this drop, to let this slide. I don't know what to do about that, but that's my opinion.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure what to do about it either. But maybe let me think about it. You can bring it up again at that meeting,
Well,
but I don't know that that's really gonna get you anywhere, or get us anywhere, or get the problem.
No, but I just hope that. whoever gets-
I know what you could do. You go to the select board meeting, every meeting, and bring it up every
Well, I think-
year.
Or, I mean, do we just walk over to Jessica and say, do we have 5 minutes?
Jeez, Louise, it's,
Oh, did she walk in?
Yeah.
Oh, no, I didn't see it. I was like,
You know, that might.
Do we want to move on to like?
okay, why don't we finish up? Yes. Anybody have other reports? Yeah, I have a couple of quick ones. Just to remind people that there is a grassroots effort to look at speeding and recommendations to the select board about how to do traffic calming and spend $30,000 that was approved as part of the town budget. And I think, I'm gonna try to go, Stephen's gonna try to go, and my pet committee is gonna be there. I think that would be just making sure that's on people's radar. The wastewater committee I mentioned is probably gonna have its first meeting soon, it seems like. And SJ kind of mentioned this, that they'll, have you guys been following the chip law in the state legislature? It's like phenomenal, transformative, huge, never seen anything like it. The state is going to make available literally like billions of dollars for infrastructure investment through, my little layman's interpretation is like mini TIF districts that any town can do for an area or even for one project, where you forego the property tax increases and use that property tax to pay the infrastructure over time. So I'm sure we're gonna learn a lot more about it over the next couple of months, but I think that might totally upend a lot of our work and a lot of our challenge over the next year. So if you see it in BT Digger, if you see articles about it, I highly suggest reading it. Or VLCT does legislative summaries, and they've been posting about it recently, and I think it's like really big. And then the last thing is that I attended the DEI meeting because Keisha Ram Hinsdale, Senator, spoke, and there were only 8 people there, which was good because usually I would have been exposed to her in a much bigger setting. And she talked about housing, and she talked about this chip infrastructure law, and she complimented Jericho on remaining committed to social justice work and housing policy, and it was really pretty inspiring discussion. And that's all. Okay, does anybody have any other business? No. Only other thing I wanted to mention
Any
is
other
that
public comment?
we were considering if our July meeting should be canceled, because it's the week of the July 4th holiday. I'm not gonna be here and I can't be on Zoom, and I was thinking, oh, sometimes lots of other people are not here that week.
I mean, at least one of the commissioners for the second.
And we've actually gotten a lot of work done, and it's the middle of the summer, and how do people feel about skipping that meeting, taking that meeting off?
I'm not opposed to it, but I am out on the 15th. So I'll be out the next one as well.
Ooh, I will be out the 15th as well. Good to know.
So Mel, just skip July.
I mean,
I have no problem being here the first, but
First is fine.
it's July 1st is the day. Okay.
I won't be here on the 15th either.
All right, so then, can you be here on July 1st, do you think?
I'm pretty sure I can. I'm not always great about keeping up with my schedule, but
Okay, and then for June 17th, do you have an idea, Chris, of what the agenda is gonna be for that meeting?
Hopefully we'll have more on the housing approach, pull that together a little more. And I'm hoping Cam and Finley can come, you can meet them, they can meet you, and they can give you more information on it.
When do we talk about?
We're gonna talk about that with the select board.
Okay.
So that will be kind of like the kickoff discussion of that. Okay, motion to adjourn.
I move. Adjourn.
Second.
Sarah Jane motions, Chris seconds. All those in favor of adjourn, please
Yes.
say yes.
Yes.
Great, thank you.